Final exam is Friday of finals week, which is the 15th from, I didn't bring the paper, I think it is 10 to noon or something like that. However, I'm going to put this in the email. If you either want to take it earlier in the week or need to take it earlier in the week, I will give you a list of rooms and time slots which you can take it in. Because some of you may want to get it out of the way early, or if some of you have like 2 exams scheduled on Friday and would rather not take 2 on one day, that's fine with me. I don't mind bending that particular rule. As a matter of fact, if you take it earlier in the week, someone will be happier. I will be a lot happier because I'm going to the beach Friday night and I'm hoping to have all the grades done before I go to the beach. I'm just being brutally honest. I'm hoping to have your grades in the books probably like as soon as we pull in and I connect to the internet down at the beach. I'm going to put in your grades into the system before I take my dog for a leisurely walk. So, sound good? But yeah, if you like to take it earlier in the week, I'm perfectly fine with that. Now, I will be sending out, and I will send an email about this. Oh, just stretching. Anyway, now before we left the Marx topic, and by the way, I think it's kind of, you know how survey courses work? You know, when you're trying to do, what is it, the ideas of Karl Marx or the ideas of Plato in 2 class sessions. Unfortunately, you can't cover a lot of the nuances. And I apologize now for that sad fact. But there were a few things I wanted to mention before we leave the chapter. And I titled my bullet points, "Where's the Revolution?" And this is because Marx made the prediction that a violent revolution was inevitable. And many people would say, see how wrong that idiot was with the bad beard and the bad clothes. Or however you might hear the ad hominem attacks against Karl Marx. Now, here are some of the reasons why the revolution hasn't happened. Although you might say, someone who agrees with Marx might say, what? Has not happened yet. Because forever's a long time. You get what I mean? You know, history is still unfolding, if you will. Now, there are more reasons I could have given here, but these are a few that are consistent with some of the textbook statements. Some of them I have added on myself. Now, number one, I say, the claim that there was no revolution may be at least moderately inaccurate. The fact is that working class uprisings have happened throughout the world, and that there were pockets of resistance throughout the country, I'm talking about the US, from the 1880s through the 1950s. One of them you witnessed where, if you did the paper? Yeah, one of them you witnessed in the coal fields in Matewan. There were pockets of resistance all over this country. And as a matter of fact, there were instances where striking workers actually were smashing factories and things of this nature.
Yep. Homestead.
Yeah, and the problem is, and by the way, you might hear about some of the strikes in Chicago and other parts of the Midwest. Keep in mind, the reason why we tend not to know about these things is because they oftentimes don't show up where? They don't show up in your U.S. history books. And if they do show up in the U.S. history books, it's like a sentence or 2. So the students really don't get much broader context anyway. Now, arguably, and I could have added to this, some people would say there are some people who still want a revolution. And granted, this is not Marxist per se, but it is democratic socialist. Supporters of which member of the Senate tend to hold some democratic socialist ideals, which do sort of correspond with Marx's critiques of capitalism, and I should say critiques of unrestrained capitalism, and the unsustainability of the hardest working people getting poorer, while those who are the idle rich keep getting what?
Richer.
Keep getting richer. Who am I talking about?
Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, talking about Bernie Sanders. And some of his supporters even talked about it as a sort of Sanders revolution. Now, of course, it would not have been a revolution of Marx's type if it were taking place where? At the ballot box. It wouldn't have been a Marxist-style revolution if it were to take place at the ballot box. And by the way, it couldn't happen even if it happened at the ballot box. Because as Marx would say, the bourgeoisie would find a way to subvert that revolution. Because after all, whenever they thought that FDR, President Roosevelt, when the bourgeoisie thought that FDR was going to go too far with his social programs, they actually planned on what? And this is something that sometimes gets in the history books.
Coup d'etat.
Yeah, it is sometimes, no, it's sometimes called the business plot. You can look this one up on the internet and read about it, but it's one of those things that's not likely to show up in the history books. And by the way, yeah, coup d'etat, coup d'etat. The song from the 80s. Anyway, you've heard of it? Yeah, it's kind of a punk thing, but anyway, my sensibilities or lack thereof are showing. But yeah, they planned a coup, which is not so famously called the business plot, where a bunch of business leaders actually called up a retired Marines general named Smedley Butler. And they asked him if they were to overthrow the government, if he would step in as the president. And by the way, by president, they really meant dictator. In other words, they were hoping to set up what? A sort of business-run fascist state. Now, of course, this is one of those things that doesn't show up in the history books. And this is sort of an example that someone in a Marxist vein would put up as Exhibit A to say, even if a revolution did happen at the ballot box, the bourgeoisie would find a way to subvert it. Is that pretty fair? Do I need to say any more? Number two, resistance typically led to what I call half measures. I use this phrase in our conversations on Monday. That is, government reform and modest concessions made by the bourgeoisie in terms of better wages, conditions that workers often had to fight for via organizing and taking collective calculated risks. What do I mean by taking collective calculated risks? This language won't be on the final exam, but it might be useful if you happen to be writing one of the essay questions. Hint, not so subtle hint. What do I mean by workers taking collective actions, taking collective calculated risks? Made one. Yeah.
Wasn't it like when they were trying to organize the union?
Yeah. They knew on some level that hard times would be ahead of them. In other words, things are likely to get worse before they get better. If you've ever had friends or family members who have gone on strike, they were likely not earning any money for a period of time. And the pantry likely began to go a little bit lean. Now the idea is, if you're willing to stand together and hold out, you might be able to, I won't say win with a capital W, but you might be able to win what I have referred to here as half measures. In other words, not a complete change of the system, but at least to get better working conditions, better wages, better bennies, etc., etc. Now, if you were looking at it in terms of the times of Make One, you might have been talking about things like improved safety standards and things of this nature. Because coal mining was what? And it still is.
Dangerous.
Yeah, it's dangerous work. And you probably learned in the film, and that dialogue turns out to be very, very true, that very frequently they could have taken relatively cheap measures to make the mines a little safer. But But of course they didn't do that because any amount of expenditures isn't good for the bottom line. And remember, as Joe Kenahan said, you're not men to the company. You're no more valuable than what? Yeah, the machinery. When you're broken up, they'll throw you away and get another one. And by the way, back in those days, if they believed that you were a labor risk, they might have actually intentionally sabotaged the mines while you were down in there. That is what was not explicitly said, but it was alluded to when the character Elma Radner talked about her husband dying in a mine explosion. He was a union man. It was just convenient that the union organizers were the ones who got killed in the mine explosion. And just to make this contemporary, folks, in other parts of the world, this struggle is a little more, what shall I say, more pronounced than it is here in the United States. And it's partly because many of us have achieved these half measures, and the devil that we know is better than the devil that we what? You know the cliche. The devil that we know is better than the devil that we don't know. I believe that there is a problem. I love my job, by the way. I hope it shows. I actually think I am paid pretty decently for doing something that I want. I actually want to do. I am not an alienated worker. But I do find it troubling that large numbers of my compadres in my office bay do not have what I have. There's no official statement saying that I can't talk about this, so I'm going to talk about it as an example. Many of my compadres are what? The word starts with an A. Adjuncts. Some of them working 3 or 4 colleges, driving hither and thither, working many hours without any benefits. Many of them are actually have nice degrees and well qualified, but they're living near what? Hint, poverty line. I think that there is something systematically wrong with that. I also think there is something systematically wrong with the fact that the people who tend to not do the job of educating are far better compensated than, are far better compensated with those who do the educating. There is a sort of class war in the academy, if you know what I'm talking about. Do I need to be explicit or don't I? Good, you don't need to spell it out. There is a class war in the academy. Go ahead.
As in, like, between the teachers and those who...
The business side. Administrators. Those who are sometimes paid 2 to 3 times what those of us with master's degrees and PhDs are, who actually do the job of direct educating and so forth. That kind of thing. And of course, we have people at the very top of the food chain in education. And by the way, it's not as bad here at Hack than it is at some other institutions, because there's more public oversight, because there's public money involved. But there's a serious issue when you have the president of a college making $1.5 million a year, when they can't even afford to buy positions for full-time teachers. When they're paying graduate assistants to teach classes like this, who don't even have their degrees yet. But of course, those graduate teaching assistants are pretty much being paid what? You know, this is a problem at places like Penn State. And when I was talking about $1.5 million a year, I was thinking about now disgraced, I guess I can say his name on film, now disgraced former Penn State President Graham Spanier. You remember he was all tied up with the Sandusky scandal? I remember that. We're talking people paid in excess of $1.5 million a year. And they also get free lodging while they're there. How many, you've seen they basically look like plantation estates on a lot of these college campuses. But yeah, there's a class war at places like this too. Do I need to drone on any further? But of course you find this in just about every line of work. Now, by the way, the administrators are not the bourgeoisie. They are the agents of the bourgeoisie, who are better compensated members of the working class. Just like the Baldwin-Felts detectives, how many of you remember watching the film? The Baldwin-Felts detectives, remember, are not the bourgeoisie. They are the agents of the bourgeoisie who are better compensated. And by the way, they have no problem gunning down some members, their fellow members of the working class, if they are, of course, what? Yeah, if they're going to get paid for it. You see, the bourgeoisie never fights its own war. They will hire members of the proletariat to fight the war. So they never officially get their hands dirty. And of course, they never get blown up. That's why, conspicuously, in a movie like Make One, you never actually see the bourgeoisie. Just like in real life, most of us never see the bourgeoisie. I don't walk in their circles. I'm poor white trash to them. Well, I'm poor white trash anyway, but you know, I'm poor white trash to them. Anyway, I'm having a little too much fun here. Now, why did Marx think that the half measures would ultimately not succeed? This is the easy one. Well, because the circular answer is because they're half measures. But why are they half measures? Marazzo.
Because they're not fixing the problem, they're just dealing with something that's temporary.
Yeah, he's got it right. They don't actually fix the problem. They put proverbial band-aids on the symptoms of the larger problem. Marx would say the larger problem is the system itself. You can put band-aids on the system all you want, but eventually the wounds are going to open up again, and to keep the analogy going, the blood's going to spurt out everywhere. Eventually. And this is why, of course, we still see remnants of this kind of labor/class struggle. We still see it today. And it's partly because why? You hear this cliche before. Every time the workers take one step forward, cliche, take it away. One step forward, it almost always seems that not long thereafter, 2 steps will be taken back. What am I talking about there? I'll talk like my daddy, if you don't mind. He says, I'm sorry for your generation, son. We didn't do enough. And I'm saying the same thing to my daughter. Because I recognize that things are going to keep getting worse before they what? Yeah, before they get better. Because costs on just about everything are rising, while what is not rising? Salaries and wages for the working class are not going up. But meanwhile, basic costs of living like housing, health care, etc., are all going up. And of course, my politics are showing here. Every time we hear about tax cuts, those of us who, Bob Dylan style, know which way the wind blows, knows that under the tax cut plan, I am actually going to be likely to what? Not pay less, but pay more in taxes. And I know on top of that, that any time federal taxes are cut, other kinds of taxes will what? Other kinds of taxes will go up. So while the top 5% of wage earners will get massive tax cuts, the rest of us will probably be paying more longitudinally in a nickel and dime sense. Because you can't cut taxes like this when you've got 3 wars going on and you're planning on starting another one. Because the man who some people call the Cheeto probably has no problem going to war with the man who I'll call the Mad King. Sounds a little Game of Thrones there. But yeah, I call him, I call our friend on the other side of the Pacific the Mad King. I imagine he's having a lot of what right now? I think he's having fun. Not just because he's mad, but because he can what? He basically is playing the United States. He's probably spending his time laughing all the time. He doesn't bloody care, if I can borrow that mild vulgarity. Yeah.
Well, to put Khrushchev's quote, to put a Khrushchev quote into a modern sense, South Korea is like the testicle of the West. All I have to do is squeeze it and they'll scream.
Yeah, more or less. Oh, by the way, I'm glad that he mentioned Mr. Khrushchev.
Khrushchev.
Yeah. Well, I've heard some of our friends pronounce it Khrushchev, but anyway. Now, he is well known for his theatrics at the UN General Assembly. How many of you have seen footage of it? He was the premier of the Soviet Union during much of the 1960s, or late 50s, 60s, pounding his shoes on the desk of the General Assembly, chanting, "We will bury you." He was not talking about them burying the Western powers militarily. He was talking about burying the Western powers how?
Economically.
Yeah, economically. Well, why? Well, maybe we're seeing it now, way after his death. But the fact is, we are really spread very what?
Then.
We are spread very thin in order to wage what Lenin, the first head of the Soviet Union, would refer to as Imperialist Wars. In other words, the reasons why the global economic powers go to war is in the name of the bourgeoisie. Because the bourgeoisie needs what from the third world? Now, third world is un-PC. We call it the developing world now. What's the only reason why we give two you-know-whats about the developing world? It's not because we're wonderful humanitarians who want to spread Christendom or anything like that, which was what they used to say in the 19th century Marazzo.
Because we live in it.
What?
Because we live in it.
No, that's not quite where I was going.
Because we can get stuff out of them.
Yeah. Saddam Hussein knew which way the wind blows. And by the way, this is not an endorsement of Saddam Hussein, so please don't misrepresent me. This is why one of the first things he did, or had his soldiers do when he knew the U.S. was going to invade, was he had them do what?
Burn the oil.
Yeah, burn the oil fields. We know exactly which way the wind blows. You wouldn't care about this place from anywhere else in the world if there were not resources to plunder. We wouldn't give two squats about Iran if there were not resources to plunder. We wouldn't care about Venezuela unless there were resources to plunder. I think that's an obvious fact. And you don't need to read Karl Marx to know this.